Welcome to our third edition of Footwear Friday. This may be our last because the fourth one was supposed to be questions and we haven't had any questions. So this may be closing it down. But today, what I wanted to go over just kind of where we are as an industry, kind of the shifts that have happened over time, kind of the important details-ish from there. We're going to do some rough estimating, but kind of just to catch up, what we've talked about it is how a shoe fits. Then we've gone into a toolbox, really just what's the purpose of different types of shoes? Why do we use different types of shoes? And today we're going to kind of catch up on kind of the shifts in the industry over the years and why those shifts may or may not have occurred. So kind of to get started and kind of think about that is if we go back, let's say 100 years, to where we are now, science is very different, right? And we know that we have new technology, new materials, and that's really allowed us to grow and advance to where we are now. And so when we look at this, and we see, kind of why shoes exist, it's because of science, right? Every shoe design, every shoe manufactured has science and what we call this biomechanic word in it. And so biomechanics is really just the way our body, the way our locomotive body moves through space, realistically. So if I lift my leg, what does that take to get to the next phase? It's kind of how we look at biomechanics. How is it going to function? What is it going to do? And go from there. So just because science may be saying something different now to what it was 100 years ago, doesn't mean 100 years ago it was wrong. It's just it's evolved, right? Because we're able to do more research and do more developing of those materials. And with that research, we may be able to understand something a little bit better compared to what we used to be able to. And so really kind of where I want to start off is around the 1920s. There's obviously been footwear before then. Leading into it, obviously the creation of shoes was started because we started paving roads, and they wanted something to protect their barefoot because their barefoot started to tear. But, really going in the 1920s, around then we had kind of the invention of the Converse, right? That canvas style shoe. And that was kind of really the big footwear manufacturing thing that kind of led us to where we are. And so what allowed us to get there was there was a rubber material on the bottom of the shoes. And that's where shoes and rubber kind of came, kind of developed to here, and which is why we use the term sneakers nowadays. Is really from that era of the 1920s, because what that rubber material allowed the footwear to basically do is it allowed us to sneak up on people. Shoes weren't as loud, and so when we were able to sneak, that's where the term sneakers came from. And so when you hear that term used today, now you have a little bit of history of where it came from. But going in there, kind of track and field really took a big jump in the 1940s with the invention of two brothers in a German town, creating basically Adidas and Puma that were largely dictated towards track and field athletes and track and field movements. And so that's where footwear really took another turn, right? We had about 20 years there where people were buying shoes, and now they have this specialty retailer, from a brand standpoint where they come from. Jumping forward some more, really the next big movement in the running industry was the creation of Nike, with Phil Knight selling shoes out of the back of his car. There's an awesome book out there called Shoe Dogs. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a great kind of just history of where Nike came from and kind of developments, and it's really, really, really good book. Recommend it. But really what that allowed us to do is kind of started the movement of putting cushioning underneath people's foot to have protection from the road. And so that's, really what started today. So as much as, shoes are out there, we look at Puma, we look at Adidas kind of starting around the same time, and then, really going to Nike and some other brands coming off of there. But, from the 60s, the next major movement was in the 1980s. And what we found is that there was a lot of people getting hurt while they were running. And so, where, really kind of the big footwear research was done about 1986. And we largely used that research, that one research field that someone did in the field of biomechanics from about 1986 to probably about 2005 to 10, around in there, which is when science allowed us to kind of catch up. There's been a lot of research done on the foot the last 10, 20 years, but realistically in the 1980s, that's where kind of most of the one research piece, again, field of biomechanics came from. And what they found was that runners were getting hurt, and they attributed it to the motion of the foot, that as the foot came in and it landed, and I have my friend here, my bony foot friend, as the foot came in, there was this just jerking sensation of the foot. And we had the motion of controlling that motion. And so that's where kind of the stabilization field came from. And so you had shoes like the Chariot, which is now the Brooks Beast, come out. The Cayano had a different name back then as well, but that was kind of the field of the 80s. And we just recently, in the last, I would say 5 to 6 years, started kind of removing those postings. I mean, the number one selling shoe in that line removed its post. And so what a posting was, and I don't have my shoes today, which is probably stupid on my part, but anyways, was just a little bit of a denser material underneath the foot of that inside. So basically it would sit about right here on the foot, right? And what they said was that it would slow the rate of that pronation word. So as the foot came in, it would slow the rate of that and allow the body to absorb more of that impact. Again, it wasn't necessarily wrong. They were in the field back then. There's definitely a purpose for those shoes out there still today. But I think what we have found with science is that what the claims that they were making back then doesn't necessarily add up to today. And realistically, still, even with that piece of the denser foam in the shoes, we still saw runners getting hurt to the capacity about 50% still. So in the 60s, we had 50% of people getting hurt. In the 80s and 90s and 2000s, we still had 50% of runners getting hurt. And so, when you're looking at that from a footwear manufacturing piece, it's why are people getting hurt? What can we do to kind of fix this? Because obviously we know if runners are getting hurt, they're less likely to do their sport, which means they're not buying shoes, which is a problem. And so, really realistically, kind of the next major movement in the running field came in the mid 2000s. So, 2005-ish to, we're going to say 2010, just for short math. And that was kind of what we call the minimalistic movement. Nike created this shoe, again, staying with that Nike, called the Free. And then we all know this shoe called the Five Finger by Vibram, which was originally designed to be a kayaking shoe, but really took over in the running scene. And what really kind of popularized that movement, which most people give credit to, is Born to Run, which is a book about a tribe out of Mexico who run up and down, and they run barefoot, right? They're or with very minimal protection on their foot, and they're hardly ever hurt. And so not that movement was wrong or incorrect. Again, it was just another popular movement back in the day. But yet we still saw 50% of people get hurt, on average. And so even though those people had less material underneath their foot, they were still getting hurt. But what I think that movement really did was it really designed footwear to hear. I mean, when you hear people talk about drops and less material underneath their foot, that can really be attributed back to that minimalistic movement, to saying, hey, this really advanced footwear. So that was kind of a big piece in the running industry. About 5 to 10 years later, a different paradigm shift came. So, basically we went from that minimalistic movement all the way to what most people classify as the maximal movement. And so really what kind of headlined those two shoes was Hoka becoming popular. So Hoka was created, I believe, in 2006. But, they were more cushioning underneath your foot, lower profile, again, that lower drop standpoint, but really just more cushioning. And so the maximalization movement kind of existed. They weren't the only piece to actually come out back then. We had the creation of the Boost material by Adidas. Again, throwing that back there. Again, it was more material, spongier material, cushion, more cushion underneath your foot. And that's kind of what headlined that, was just more cushion. If you've tried on any of their shoes, you feel that pretty instantly when you go in. And again, science is dictating this. If we can put more cushioning underneath your foot, the thought is that we can protect it from the outside environment, right? Less forces, less shock being absorbed through the body. From there, though, we even got even more fancier. And so that kind of brings us up to current day situation. And that's where, some of the research I've done, here lately is calling it the SMART movement in the industry, and that's just where we're getting really technologically advanced in the shoes. And so here we have 3D printed uppers, right? So you have a bunch of brands being able to 3D print, that you have personalized products coming out, right? Which is where, they're able to kind of personalize it to you at more mass varieties. Personalized products have existed for years. Most professional athletes have on something that was designed around them and their foot and their body type. But from a mass standpoint, you're having that become a little more popular. But what really highlights this smart movement is the fact that we're able to use lighter weight materials to do the things that they were able to do back in the 80s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, right? So we're able to have that lighter weight material under your foot. And what we know from science and research is that anything we put under your foot that is lighter makes you more efficient. So every 1 ounce we drop in a pair of shoes, we gain about 1% efficiency. So over the course of a marathon, you're going to see that adds up pretty significantly. You see carbon plate, right? I mean, hence the same thing, right? More carbon, if we can do that and we can increase or decrease the road vibrations, we make you faster over a course of X, Y, and Z, which is awesome. Speed has kind of, again, going back to that carbon plate and lighter weight materials, speed has been a big, I want to be faster. I want to run faster. I want to have a PB or a PR, right? Personal best or personal record. But then, the big thing there is they don't want to sacrifice the cushion or the comfort. Those are kind of the two things that are really big in the industry today is, hey, we may be able to make you this 3 ounce shoe, but we're not going to sacrifice the support that's in that shoe versus, the comfort that's in that shoe. And so really what has allowed us to do that is the advancement of science and the advancement of research, right? Knowing that how a foot functions, knowing how the foot's going to move in space with these materials. Not only can we put these materials underneath foot, but we can test them and test them faster and produce them faster and make them faster, which is kind of the cool thing in the industry. Footwear doesn't take necessarily 2 years. So when we look at shoes and how they update, typically a cycle of a shoe is about 2 years because it's how long it takes to create it. Whatever I'm making today, you'll see it in 2 years. But we're able to shrink that timeline down to about 18 months, I would say, on average right now. And with production and with everything happening in the world right now, who knows where that's gonna last? But the ability to turn those out and to turn the research and the science out has given us the capability of creating some awesome pieces of footwear and innovative pieces of footwear. I think that's kind of the other big key in footwear currently is that it's all just super innovated, messing with the design of it, the functionality, how an upper actually holds your foot, how it flies through air, with aerodynamics coming into place, and so that's kind of where the movement is today. And I think it's, you definitely, to know where you're going, you have to know where you've come from, what worked, what didn't work. But again, everything is backed by science. So when we look at does this work, does it not work, was it wrong to be barefoot? Was it wrong to have, a stability piece underneath your shoe? The answer is no, none of it's wrong. It's just, does it work for you? Right? And that's where everything of this movement has to tie back to is it going to work for you and your body? And that goes all the way back to our first talk, right? Is it comfortable? Does it work? And then, when are you using it? Going back to our second talk, does that piece of footwear work for you at this time, or does it work later? We don't know, right? And that's the fun part about our industry is, footwear changes every year, and we have to figure out what works. A company may change the last, so the bottom piece of the footwear. They may change the upper, what we call the vamp. They may change all those things, and that may change the way it fits on your foot. And what may work for you this year may not work for you next year. Maybe you got hurt. Maybe the body function. Maybe you started a different activity and that's changed your mass. Like all those things are fun and play, and that's why for us in the footwear industry, it's a game, it's a puzzle. We all like to fix it. We're all that type of person where we want to take this puzzle piece and be able to put it together from there. So I appreciate you guys joining me on these talks over the last couple of weeks. We'll see where we go next week. I'll talk to JB and we'll figure it out. But if anything, thank you for joining me. Thanks for listening to me rant about some things that I'm pretty passionate about, and we'll see you soon.